Countdown in 3, 2, 1. Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of the Monsters Den. This is kind of our part 2 look at the film Spookies. We've got a cast here, including, all right, we've got creature effects director John Dods. John, if you could raise your hand. Everybody raise your hand when I call you out there. We've got art director Cecilia Doran. We've got, once again, the filmmakers of the Rondo Award-winning Twisted Tale, The Unmaking of Spookies documentary, which is on the Blu-ray. You can catch Glen Baisley and Michael Gingold.
Yep.
What's happening, guys?
Hey, this is the Rondo Award, which we won last year, actually, but they finally just shipped them out because of pandemic delays. So if anyone who voted for us is watching, listening, whatever, thank you for your votes.
Yes, thank you.
A real honor because this was a labor of love for everybody and a lot of commitment to getting it done in a very, very short amount of time.
It could definitely not have been done without the Twisted Tales team. And I say Twisted Tales, so if you haven't seen the documentary, you'll understand why we're not saying Spookies.
Twisted Souls.
Twisted Souls. My brain is a twisted tale these days.
There you go.
Twisted Souls, the movie that became Spookies, thanks to the
Right.
machinations of the financier as explored in the documentary, who took a very ambitious creature feature and turned it into something else that anyone who knows the movie is familiar with. But basically, this group of people set out to make a creature film, kind of an Evil Dead-esque film, and then the financier kind of hijacked it and brought in someone else to add a bunch of new material that just was completely ridiculous and turned Spookies into the film it became.
Was John likes to call it an 80s rubber monster fest, which is very much what it is. Mm-hmm. And but yeah, it's definitely worth checking out the documentary. It was a chance to really tell the true story of what happened with the amazing team behind Twisted Souls and how there was this regime takeover, and they basically took two movies, squished together like a really bad peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Yeah, like to point out, because there's a misconception among a lot of people that this was two movies put together. It was not. It was a film that had about a 2.5-hour rough cut already completed,
right,
before the financier took it over, and he basically had another filmmaker shoot a bunch of new material. This was not cobbled from another movie.
Right.
This film was shot specifically to stick into this movie, even though it had nothing to do with the story it was telling. And just turned it into something else.
And the key thing to point out too is that Eugenie Joseph, who was the director that took over, shot just enough stuff that she could steal the title of a director and be able to get a directorial debut with this movie. So, but with that said, we should kick it off now. So,
and somehow, despite all of that, this is a very entertaining film. All right. Yeah. Maybe not for the right reasons when you think about it, but it's a lot of fun. And and I think a lot of the credit, is going to go to the two folks we have here, Cecilia and John, who added some really cool things to this film. John, I'm going to start with you. So all sorts of interesting creatures in this film. If you're like, for me, and I'm sure I'll speak for Dan and Rich here as well, it's like we love monster films. And there's plenty of that in this film. So what recollections do you have of, and maybe you can talk about some of the creations that you put together for Spookies and how that came about and how satisfied were you with the end result?
A lot of people created effects for the film. I'm going to give a shout out to Vincent Quastini, one of those people who's recovering in a hospital from COVID. Mm-hmm. So, hey, Vincent, continue your progress.
Yeah, get well soon.
Get better soon, dude.
Yeah, best wishes.
He started out working with me because I needed help desperately, but then after being very helpful, segued and created on his own some monsters, which I don't know if, I think he contributed them. I don't know if he was paid to do it or he just wanted to do it, but he did a lot of work, as did many other people, Jennifer Aspinall, Gabe Bartolos, I don't know, Al Magliochetti. They had Arnold Gargillo, they had quite a substantial effects crew working independently of one another, just like the big films often do, small effects houses, or not small, working independently of each other, creating the final result, hopefully guided by a single artistic intelligence, which wasn't quite the result in this case, yet nonetheless, it's having a resurgence of interest and popularity in that 2020s. I didn't think I'd ever hear of it again. In 1985, I thought that was it. I'm done with Spookies. Now all the films I worked on in the 80s, that's all I ever hear about now. It's the low budget, not always super polished films, which have gone on to generate great interest, some of them, in modern times, because the low budget, I don't know, garage kit, do it yourself in the garage with minimal means. I mean, some of the films I worked on were like that, very minimal. Don Doler, a few $1,000s, and it's a feature. He made 10 of those, all of them distributed, all of them made money. And today it's a genre. Then it was just like, well, this isn't very good. This looks like that's grainy, you know, it's not polished like a Hollywood film. And today that's acceptable because that's the genre it is. And so the assets are seen today more clearly than they were often at the time the films were released. So Spookies is one of those films. Whatever people, and there were a lot of talented people working on Spookies, whatever these talented people put into the film, you know, somehow still manages to shine through in spite of what seemed to be every attempt by the producer to make a mess out of it. And he succeeded in some ways, but there are very many interesting elements. People are enjoying it more today than I think they ever did in 1985. I created.
I'm sorry.
Who said I'm sorry?
Michael Lee, I think. Invaded our airwave.
Is he here? Is he in the black space?
He's like hiding. He was going to crawl out of this.
Hiding in the shadows. Hi, Michael. He was nice to me. I wasn't part of the melodrama. Thank God. I created several monsters. I was given a lot of liberty as to what I could do. The directors, Tom and Brendan, sort of gave me a general idea. I guess they showed me a script. But apart from like spider woman transformation or snake demon monster, I mean, it wasn't very specific beyond that. So they just let me do drawings or preliminary sculptures, and they approved or commented on my work in progress, and I adjusted it accordingly. They pretty much were reacted favorably to what I was doing, so it didn't go through dramatic changes. I did the snake demon monster, which was an arm inside a rubber puppet. It was a rather large puppet, like might have been 4 feet long. And he was operated by puppeteers beneath floors which were raised on the set, and by other various means. And he had some mechanical features in his face. The spider woman was interesting. She is a beautiful Asian woman who transforms by means of prosthetics, mechanical effects, more mechanical effects, about 4 stages of change to a grotesque spider creature. The final stage of which was to be a stop motion animation monster, which never was shot, although we built it. It was the end of the production. They were out of time, they were out of money, and I was out of patience with the producers and the general situation. Tom and Brendan and Frank Farrell were always very nice and seemed to me to be very competent. So in spite of an illuminating documentary, I still don't understand why all that happened, but this is not a completely unique story. You hear stories like this. They're rarely, if ever, documented as well as Michael and Glen's piece on Spookies, behind the scenes and history of documented. But, you know, I've worked on other low budget films. A lot of it seemed very familiar. You know, sometimes low budget films are made by people who don't have a huge amount of experience. And sometimes it's just that. It's not bad people doing bad things. Sometimes it's just like people want to make a good movie and don't really know how to do it. And anyway, it was a good job for me. I I wasn't used to having to film so fast. My previous film had been a film where this would be The Deadly Spawn. We had an entire year to shoot special effects shots or pickup shots or insert shots. And Spookies was very different insofar as a lot of the effects footage got pushed to the end of the shoot. Not all, but a lot of it, at least my stuff. And they had to get it in the camera and move on. And so we didn't have hours or days to set up, which was more like what I was used to. Take a long time to do things because there was no overhead on my previous project, Deadly Spawn. Nobody was being paid, so it didn't cost anything if it took a week or a month to do it. Apart from film processing costs. So it was, I was disappointed insofar as I knew it could have looked better if I had had a year to shoot, which didn't happen. It was more like a few days to shoot everything. But it was a good experience for me. It was a beautiful set. Everyone was very nice. I was there towards the end when things were getting bleaker and darker and more unpleasant, but I was on the periphery of that. It wasn't an awful experience for me the way I know it was for some of the other participants, especially the creative principals, Frank and Tom and Brendan, I think suffered the most. But
so our very own Rich Catino here has also worked on some low budget films doing makeup effects and things like that. So Rich, I don't know if you have any questions for John in regards to that.
Yeah, I mean, it could go to anybody, but yeah, I've done some haunted attractions too. So that's always fun. And this movie reminds me of that, the rubber monsters. A lot of them I could see in haunted attractions today, especially the big ones, that are huge around Halloween time. So it reminds me of that a lot. So when I was watching it again, let me see, I wrote down a couple things. The one wound that the girl gets on her leg, how was that done? It looks so, it was so well done. You know which one I'm talking about? I think it's when the Reaper gets her, if I'm correct, or something like that.
I've seen it because I've seen the film, but I don't remember. I didn't do that.
It's a good close-up shot.
Would that have been Vinny or Gabe that did Vincent Gostini or Gabe that Cecilia that would have done that?
It sounds like a Gabe or a Vinny.
Yeah, question.
I think it was
It's possible that it was Jennifer Aspinall only because it was,
right.
On the set. I can't remember myself, but that was Joan Ellen Delaney, the actress. I mean. And Jennifer did a lot of things. I mean, especially the on the set stuff. Because she did more than just the beauty stuff. She made molds and etc. So I would guess that it was her, only because it wasn't a standalone monster. It was an application. Like when again, this nobody ever saw this, but when Jake, the character that's supposed to be the actual introduction of the film, he goes into the house and he gets attacked by invisible whatever they are. I'm pretty sure it was Jennifer who put appliances on his face with like string or wire, and I was off camera, and when he gets scratched, I just rip the stuff, and you see the his ripped skin and red underneath and all that. Very simple idea, but it looked great live.
Yeah, the one effect I'm talking about looks great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All that stuff.
Well, there's like even the great aging effects and stuff that you don't get to see quite as much. You see in the Pinhead reel and some of the outtakes, there was a shot outside the house. Of course, the whole ending got cut and changed. when it became Spookies, but you see a little bit more of that makeup. And those applications,
Right.
would that have been Jennifer as well that did that?
Yes, Jennifer did a lot of that, especially the faces. As I said before, I did Joan Ellen's chest, her chest and her arms.
Was that Huey and Dewey?
Huey and Dewey, yeah, Louie. And that took a while because that was like a whole the chest and the arm business. But that was just the usual toilet paper and liquid latex business where you just it's just, I mean, it's very easy to do, but you have to discipline. You just do it the same way all along the length of the body, whatever it is. And I think though that she, even after I did that, I think she asked Jennifer applied all the makeup just so it was all done exactly the same. But she was in charge of a lot of that sort of stuff. I mean, Jennifer is just immensely talented, shockingly talented. I mean, she was, wow. I spent, even though technically I was the art director, and of course I did all of that, kept the sets, properly arranged, cleaned with the props and all of that. Often Tom would point at me and say, go help the makeup people, go help Jennifer do this, go help Gabe do that. And it was like, oh my God. So there was a lot of running around. I never got any sleep for months. That's why I did things like help Jennifer with Joan Ellen's makeup and help paint and stuff like that. The skeleton in the closet with the Ouija board and other things like that.
The tombstones, you set up a lot of the cemetery too, right?
The tombstones in the front of the house were almost entirely me while everybody else slept, because it was a night shoot and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody was still asleep, and I had lots of tombstones to put up. So I woke up and it's like, okay, tombstone duty. Because, there was just, we didn't have enough people to help. And that was just a reality that we had to deal with. That's why Tom was always assigning me to help this person and that person with the makeup. As I like to point out, the hallway monster, Gabe was sort of kind of underneath inside it, manipulating the face with, whatever it is going on inside. But I was on my knees on the floor, pushing the dolly forward. So, the hallway monster was me and Gabe with me on my knees. So exciting. Oh, I love showbiz, don't you? But
I have to ask, did you have to take the tombstones down and put them back up every night, or did you have just put them up once and they stayed there?
When we had a night shoot like that, where everything was scheduled more or less so that an entire week or so, let's say, I don't remember the exact number of days, but let's say it was a week. It was everything was for whatever was going on in the front of the house. So the stones stayed up for I sometimes had to fix a few that have flopped over, because they were the way I had to put them up was like you find twigs and stuff and then you like spear it into the ground. I mean, it was all very whatever works kind of thing.
And one thing that's covered in the doc to note is, if you look closely at the tombstones, some of the participants put their family names on there. There's a Bartelos tombstone, etc.
Yeah. Some important names were, front and center, and Gabe's parents was right there. I put my father's I mean, my father's tombstone wasn't decorated the way Gabe's was, but you know, it's someplace in the front, and a few other people. But I think a few other people actually reused some of the tombstones for the back of the house. That's when you know, they're running up or on the roof and all of that.
So speaking of tombstones, kind of along the same lines. So at the the end of the film, and obviously this was probably shot very late in the game here. You got all these undead or zombies, whatever you want to call it. This whole, I mean, there's a whole slew of them. So where did you guys find those people to fill those roles? And I'm sure you could tell not a lot of time was spent on makeup or anything for them. So how did that all happen? Probably very quickly.
Well,
I think, right?
the whole zombie thing that was Joseph's stuff. We had nothing to do with zombies.
Right. That was all part of the reshoots, and apparently, according to I can't recall who on the documentary said that, like, he was calling up these the producer was calling these wealthy families in Rye saying, "Hey, do you want to bring your family down?" And so you have all these ancient zombies in very modern, up-to-date clothing, that they look like they were buried in it yesterday. And it's among the many things in the movie that makes no sense.
Yeah, actually, right, Anthony Valbero had told that story. Who's one of the actors in the movie, because he lived in the area and he'd heard it from neighbors. Like, by the way, somebody had told him, like, they're shooting back at the mansion. He's like, what? That's how he found out about it.
Because they had asked all the crew and the cast to come back for the reshoots, and almost all of them, out of solidarity with the original director, said no, and we're not bringing back any props either. You got to use what you have. So they didn't go very far with the zombie costumes in that.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody just showed up and they poured some blood on the clothes they wore to the set.
And that's why too, like, and you'll learn more about it in the documentary, but there's, one of the standout scenes is when Anthony's character runs out of the house and he's ducking and weaving, but there's nothing there, because at that point the opticals hadn't been finished and included for the ghost that would have been attacking him. So it looks like he's having some kind of seizure. But there's other things like that where, it says they're coming through the door or whatever, and then it cuts and it shows the cat monster on the other side, like against the door. So, Joseph's tried to make it work, given the fact that nobody else came back, but it just, if you really analyze it, look, it doesn't kind of gel or make sense in a lot of places.
Well, the cat monster, the werecat is the worst, because it's like, he just shows up in these random spots all the time, and he's always like lurking.
Right.
But he never does anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, what's the purpose of this character here, right?
Well, one of the things you can tell, because the transfer is so good that Vinegar Syndrome did, is you can tell the difference between the look of the footage.
Yeah.
The way it's lit and the graining and the grain quality. It's very obvious that because the stuff for Twisted Souls was shot by Ken Kelch, who did a number of Abel Ferrara films and is a real artist with the lighting and the shadows. And then you look at the other stuff and it looks like it was shot for television.
Well, just the style, Tom and Brendan's artistic style compared to Eugenie Joseph's is night and day difference. And you can see that between the scenes, the contrast.
You can call what she had a style.
Yeah, Tom really, I mean, he was such an aficionado of all films, good ones, bad ones, in between ones, everything. I mean, he would examine films repeatedly. There were times when he had already seen a film, didn't matter what it was, a couple of times that week. Sometimes on cable they'll show a film repeatedly for a couple of weeks, and he would watch it like 5 times or something, and because he was scrutinizing it and examining it and studying it. And this is something he did obviously all his life, because he was watching films when he was 5 years old. He would walk to the theater in his neighborhood, and he just couldn't get enough of it. And all of that information was just bubbling and churning inside his head. And so when he understood that Spookies, Twisted Souls wasn't going to be some like great masterpiece, but he couldn't help interjecting some kind of art into it. You look at the lighting for the Spider-Woman before she transforms, when she's still human, and it's stunning. You got the the glue and the red light on either side of her face, and it's, you know, you're just, it always takes my breath away when I see shots of that. And you know, all that stuff, he, you know, I think that's one of the reasons why the audience still likes this film, because, you know, even with the bad editing, they can get a taste of what Tom was trying to say, and you know, his brilliance just comes out. You know, it's been corrupted, it's been changed a little, but it's still there. Not the way he wanted it to be, sadly, but he couldn't help, you know, I mean, everything he touched had some kind of wonderful artistic and interesting and weird and sometimes perverted edge to it, because he was just so, he was unique. He was just amazing. His talent was outstanding.
I know Frank told a story on the documentary about, you know, how upset Tom was when he first saw how they bastardized the edit of the Spider-Woman transformation. John, I'm just curious your thoughts about when you first saw it on the screen, you know, given the fact that you created the creature, you know, what was your first impressions of how that edit, you know, unfolded? I don't know if you'd originally seen the original cut that Tom had worked on.
No, I wish I had. I wish I could see it now. I don't know. I keep hoping if they could. A few years ago, they found 10 minutes of missing footage from Metropolis. Can't they find something from Spookies?
Well, apparently that the
Who
original
knows?
cut is in a vault somewhere, and nobody, it's Michael Lee may have destroyed it. Who knows? Because as I said, there was a 2.5-hour cut Brendan and Tom had assembled, and Lee took that away and did what he did with it. And to the best of everyone's knowledge who we've talked to, that it just doesn't exist anymore, sadly.
It's such a shame. I don't think he had enough experience, what I know about Michael Lee, to look at a rough cut and understand that what a rough cut is and how it might evolve into something very different. But that's just my speculation. I don't know why he did what he did.
I don't even think it's that. I think, excuse me, Lee was never an artist, first of all. He had no interest in the process of filmmaking. All he cared about was the money. This was a project, and it was going to make him money, period.
When I was with him,
you know, he didn't care where any of those details. All of that was lost on him. I mean, he really. I mean, Michael Lee is basically a knuckle dragging anthropoid who just has no clue, and that's a nice way of putting it. I'm sorry.
John, what you were saying?
I had a couple of conversations with Michael Lee on the set, not a lot, but a couple, and all he talked about was money. What you say is true. He was very nice to me. I don't, you know, I have no problem with Michael Lee, but I certainly understand the problem Tom and Frank and Brendan had with him. The spider set lighting was very beautiful. I remember that today, how lovely it was to be there on the set. I mean, from my perspective, what they shot in a few hours or at most a couple of days, I really would have loved to have 8 weeks to shoot the same footage. And I wasn't going to be happy with the way it came out. I mean, now it's, you know, I've come to terms with it. It's what it is. And it's probably not as bad as I thought it was then. It isn't. But Michael Lee talked about money. We were talking about the Deadly Spawn, which I worked on. I created the creatures for the Deadly Spawn, 1982. Ted Boas and I made that film. And Michael Lee purchased the foreign distribution rights for the territory, England, on the Deadly Spawn. And he told me what a great house he was able to buy with the money he made from distributing the Deadly Spawn. And I believe him. More money than probably any of us saw stateside. But yeah, I feel like I'm standing on the set right now. It was very carefully lit, and I understand that they were working at cross purposes entirely. What you say makes sense. Michael Lee is, very bottom line. How many houses can I buy with the money I'll make from this film? That's what he's thinking about. And, the creative principals, Brendan, Tom, Frank, are thinking about how can we make a better film? How can we make it more beautiful? How can we put some atmosphere into it? And some of that is still there, thankfully, but not nearly so much as they would have liked.
What are the percentages like? So the final film, the final product, and we may have touched on this a little bit in the first part of this series here, but like of all the original 2.5 hours that was shot, how much is the final film that we know it now? How much is that as opposed to the stuff that was done later? Was 60-40, 50-50?
Well, Frank Farrell says in the doc that he timed it, and I think the movie's 85 minutes, and I think he said 43 of it is Eugenie Joseph's, so that she could have just enough so that she would get the prime directing credit.
Yeah, so it's
Eugenie Joseph and Brendan Faulkner and Thomas Doran.
Gotcha.
And I don't know if I can't imagine there's DGA negotiation or anything on a film like this, but I'm sure that was part of her thinking, was to get in just enough of her stuff. And I'm sure Lee gave her even probably less money than he gave to Brendan and Frank to shoot this stuff, or Brendan and Tom and Frank.
Well,
but
what I heard was that they shot like 2 weeks. I mean, I don't know but
it looks it.
Well, and that's the thing is, having read the script and that's what a lot of people don't realize. There's an entire backstory to the characters. I mean, I remember seeing the first time the movie and I'm like, what's this older dude, hanging out with these younger crowd? And it actually kind of goes into that, and then Anthony Valberio's character, he's snuffing like the whole time, like he has a bad coke habit, and there's a whole backstory, about him not having his medication. And so there's a whole bunch of scenes, prior to them arriving to the house. There's a whole other opening that had a hobo, that wasn't the guy that's, that you see with the, Alec Nemzer's Billy character in the beginning. There was no Creon. There was a completely different ending to the movie, which had the house. And I don't know if the opticals were ever shot for that. The house imploding, almost like Poltergeist. Was the opticals ever shot for that?
Yeah, the opticals, that was one of the problems. We finished principal shooting. We finished, for the most part, inserts and all of that. But the opticals mostly, I mean, there were some opticals, but mostly were not finished. And I suspect part of that was because Lee just didn't want to give Al Mag any more money, or to do whatever he was doing. And of course, after the editing thing blew up, that was a moot point. I mean, opticals tend to be done later anyway. So, that's kind of the normal sequence of events. But, Lee didn't want to, he was just impatient. He just wanted the film to be finished so that he could start making money from it. And he just didn't understand any of the process. He didn't understand the purpose of editing. I mean, really, he hadn't a clue. So that's one of the problems. And of course, that just drove Tom crazy, because Tom really was the one that took the brunt of all of that nonsense towards the end. There was I mean, I know Tom was, he did not tell me in a lot of details what he was going through, but I could tell he was not a happy camper.
What was it like being in that house? I mean, that pretty impressive house. I think a lot of the atmosphere in there was captured pretty nicely. And how much did the community like kind of know what was going on and partake? Did you have, at any point in time, did you have people who lived in the area kind of like hanging around or anything like that?
Yeah, well, Frank would know more about that than I would, because those of us who are working were like focused on that totally. I think sometimes we saw some people, who wanted to know what was going on. And I think often a lot of people in the area didn't really know what we were doing. It's not as if the house is just like on a regular drag or something,
It's kind of out of the way. It's not really near any residences.
Right. And the back of it is near the water. So, and it's a large area. At one point, this didn't happen very often, but I think somebody decided, well, we all need a break. So some of us went and did like paintball shooting. Like it was a military operation, and we had two teams, and we were going to like shoot at each other, and it was ridiculous, but it was fun.
And then Gabe Bartalos crashed the Halloween party in his Muckman costume.
Yes, but that was actually going outside in the real world, and I went with them, and I don't think I was dressed as anything in particular, but it was fun, going to a nightclub or whatever the heck that was, and just watching them dance around in their Muckman suits. It's ridiculous.
With or without the fart noises.
No fart noises. There was no fart noises.
Michael Lee decided to make that change.
I know, right?
Again, as covered in the documentary, that was added during post. That was not that was not intended to be there by anybody on the Twisted Souls team.
Yeah,
right.
It totally is wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that really pisses me off about that is that the Muckmen as characters were really supposed to be scary. They were, I mean, they're like creatures literally from the mud coming up and attacking you. And, it's supposed to be, if there was like dramatic music behind that instead of stupid farting, it was supposed to scare people. It was really supposed to be, oh my God, the big Muckmen things, and, because that's how Tom wanted to shoot it, and now making it into some kind of joke is like, I don't know, that's kind of an insult to the whole concept in my mind, of course, but that's because, we were down there shooting it, and it was supposed to be scary.
Yeah.
But okay, whatever.
Those suits are really heavy too.
What's that, Rich?
Those suits look really heavy. Like, how many layers were on that?
It was mostly whatever the inside material was loaded up with latex and dirt, and I don't know what. Yeah, I don't know if it was heavy so much as just kind of cumbersome, and of course you can't see that well out of it, but it's because I know the people that were inside the suits. Even when I look at a still photograph, I can tell which Muckman is Gabe and which one is Peter Isillo, which one is John Beatty. I can just tell because the suits were not so bulky that they hid the personality of the person inside it, if you know what I'm saying. I'm sure it was hot.
Yeah.
I'm almost guaranteed that he was very hot, but that's part of the deal, you know. You want to make art, you got to suffer.
That's true.
Dan, you had a comment?
Yeah, Dan had
I had a couple comments. I mean, number one, if you know the funny thing when you talk about Brendan and Tom's footage and Jeannie Joseph's, the production values and the lighting and the special effects, the whole enchilada rises above the production values of a lot of 1980s independent horror films being made in the tri-state area. Had they been allowed to finish it, it would have been really, it would be outstanding. The Muckmen, when you watch the Muckmen, it plays out like the Tombs of the Blind Dead without the noise as they walk the Spanish film with the Templar Knights. Yep. So they everything was influenced very heavily by cinema, and it really rose above it. I was on the set. I was not in the film crew. I was friends with Arnold, and I had met Arnold in New York City. He was doing makeup at Studio 54 at Zombie Maker and for a private party. And we became friends, and I'd visit him over in Dobbs Ferry quite a bit. And he told me I'm working on a film over in the estate. And it's true what they were saying. The estate is kind of off the beaten path. There's a lot of property around it. And you could not find a better, like that's $1 million set, that ramshackle mansion at that time. As a matter of fact, I think it was slated for demolition almost at one point, right? They were thinking about, or Brenda would say, the owner said, do us a favor, just burn it down. Something along those lines.
Landmark, which it is now.
Yeah. And but I remember going over the set to visit Arnold, and I met Gabe, and Gabe must have been all of 18 years old.
Yes, 18, 19.
And I remember the tombstones on the front, and it was kind of weird because they must have had night shooting or whatever. But yes, it did have the feeling of a horror film. It was very eerie over there. So I think it wasn't in the fall, I believe. I can't really.
We shot from, let's say, the summer into Halloween. You know, like it was over by November, but it was months and months.
Right. Okay. Because I remember visiting sometime in the fall, and I, you know, never met anybody on the set. Left, and that was it. And all of a sudden, about 12, 13 years later, I'm at a show up here. There was a fellow up in the Newburgh area who used to do shows named Tim Embler. Maybe you've gone to a couple of them, Peter. You'd have these shows in the hotels. And Brendan was there with his with Frank, not Frank Farrell, and we started talking. And he says, "Oh yeah, you know, horror film. Yeah, I visited a horror set over in Purchase or Rye." He goes, "Spookies," and I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "I was the director." I said, "Come on." And this was 12 years later, and after the film was made, and that's how that whole ball got going with Brendan and I. We've been friends now for 25 years, but the film does stand out, and I really like the film. Is the production values are top notch. Everybody that came along. The question I do have though, how far into the project did Arnold work? Because then the reins were handed to Gabe. Arnold quit, or whatever the situation was. They parted company, let's say, and then he came back though, I believe, after.
It was actually pretty early, but I can't say exactly when, because like I said, that was, you know, I was there just to work, not make decisions about who's there and who isn't. Again, Frank would know the answer to that question, but it was kind of early on because I think they felt that Arnold was, it was feeling like too much for him, and obviously he needed some help. And you know what? And once Gabe started working, Gabe is again immensely talented. Just you know, when he showed up, I could see that even as a 19-year-old, he was going to have a great career. I mean, I just sensed that, and of course, I'm correct. But he was completely creative, competent, knew what to do, did it, was fearless, and it was a joy to watch him. You know. It really was.
As far as Arjulo's concerned, the consensus from the stories I've heard seems to be that he delivered Muckman costumes that no one on the crew thought were shoot ready, basically. And that was the moment when they decided we need to have someone else kind of come in and take over. And Cecilia, was Jennifer already on the film at that point?
She was on immediately. She from the start. Because well, I mean, first of all, everybody needed to have regular beauty makeup, as they call it, but also, you know, whatever other kinds of, because one of the early things they were filming was Jakey, you know, the stuff in the beginning, which no one has ever seen except us.
The hobo,
who
yeah.
said. And again, you know, she was probably doing a lot of that. So she was on, as far as I'm recalling, for everything. And and because you know, if I wasn't on the set cleaning it up or moving it around or finding props or whatever it is that I had to do, I was in the so-called makeup room, which is where her domain was, being there to either help out or whatever. You know, when Tom pointed his finger at me and said, "Go there." So I distinctly remember, like, that was one of the places I was always hanging out, in the makeup room, because somebody needed help there.
But just to get back to Arnold, but
yes.
Yeah, basically the story was it was decided that and Dave said that Arnold gave him his blessing, you know, to kind of take over, and then I do believe Arnold came back for the reshoots, that he did makeup effects when Eugenie Joseph took over, and that he was the only one of the effects people who came back.
Well, I came back for some pickup shots. And I had some conversation with Arnold, who I knew but did not work with on Spookies, but he did some very good prosthetic work for my previous movie, The Deadly Spawn, which I made the monsters for, but I did not do prosthetics then. Arnold did some very good work. I was under the impression Arnold has trouble saying no, at least then. And he just overpromised and underdelivered certain items. I mean, he couldn't say no, but he also couldn't do the work because no one could do what he promised. He was excited to work on a big, elaborate effects picture. Certainly did some good work, but perhaps with disappointing work due to impossible demands being met on him, which he encouraged because it was too exciting. It's hard when you love making monsters to say, no, I can't do that. It's like almost impossible. You want to be able to do it. I know he came back after, you know, phase 2 of the project began, whatever we're calling it. I had promised one effect that hadn't been shot yet, and this I believe I was there for shooting that after Brendan, Frank, and Tom were gone, although I only know I didn't see them. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes. All I saw was a DP and a lighting person or two. That was it. And we shot some footage that couldn't be used because it didn't match the footage shot with Ken Kelch on the set. And why should it? I mean, it wasn't being very well handled at all. So, but
yeah, no, I think that's a correct assessment of Arnold's situation. I remember going down to his basement or whatever studio thing he had there. He had tons of stuff all over the place. So it's not like he lacked any talent, but I think that shoot was overwhelming for many of us. And you know, I look back on it. I mean, I think the only reason I survived was because I was young, and I still had some energy. But it was a very intense learning experience, and you know, I'm not claiming that everything that I was able to do was some sort of perfection or anything, but you know, when I was able to make a prop like the Ouija board, where I could do lots of research and, you know, because I had time to make that one, you know, that came out great. So I was lucky that way. But you know, I mean, the monsters were really the star of this film, so they had to be as good as possible. And Tom and Brendan really had as high as standards as they were able to have. So you know, if they felt that Arnold was just so overwhelmed that he couldn't do it, you know, they knew they had to get other people.
Yeah, I want to add that. I mean, I actually met Brendan and Tom a while before Twisted Souls. I met them when I was a teenager, and they were working on a movie called Hellspawn. And I went over to Arnold's shop, and where he was creating the demon, and the stuff he was coming up with was amazing. You know, for the limited means he had, he was creating some great stuff for that. So, so he did have a lot of talent. It's just, again, it was a matter of just trying to take on too much and thinking he could do this whole project, which had 7 or 8 different creatures in it, and he just couldn't handle it all himself.
That demon used to stand in he had that demon in his shop.
Yeah, I was at his shop.
It was like 7 feet tall.
Yeah, I think it was just a clay sculpt at the time.
But it was big.
Yeah, it was huge. I think I still have photos of it somewhere.
So one of the things that we talk a lot about here on the Monsters Den is our love for like practical creature effects, right? Because it's kind of like almost like a lost art. And I think one of the endearing things about this film is that it's, you know, it's like the anti-CGI, right? So I wanted to get both of your takes on, you know, what your thoughts are on modern monster making, which obviously is mostly done, you know, via the computer. And how do you feel about that as opposed to what you created on Spookies?
One thing I and many others love about the 80s is that practical effects in genre films, monster films, were really coming into their own. Unlike during the 50s and beyond, there was a fairly long period where they were making a lot of what you might call monster movies, but on an extremely low budget. It was like the horror film was the armpit of the industry. You didn't want to be in one if you could avoid it, you know, on either side of the camera. They had trouble getting the best people, and in high-end films like Forbidden Planet or The Thing or 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea were rare exceptions. Usually these are film shot in a few days with a very little money, and the monsters reflected that, with a few wonderful exceptions, Creature from the Black Lagoon and so on. Even in the 50s, there were good ones, but by the time we got to the 80s, maybe, I don't know, Michael probably knows this better than I do. Was it a consequence of the success of Star Wars, or when did the money start to flow into horror films and genre films in a dramatically increased amounts to facilitate and to make possible better, more elaborate monsters? And I know Dick Smith had something to do with the quality of expertise infiltrating the United States, because he was very generous with he was an innovator who was very generous with his knowledge and information, and suddenly there was the standards went much higher in quality of work. I give Dick Smith a lot of credit for that happening, but there was also money there never used to be. I remember when, I don't know what year was Planet of the Apes, it was $1 million, the publicity was $1 million is being spent on makeup. I mean, this was unthinkable in the 50s or 60s, or 50s. It was maybe indicative of the explosion of budgets in special effects generally and makeup specifically. And, you know, Rick Baker, Dick Smith, Dick Smith, the stuff he did on Exorcist they had to they couldn't call him a makeup artist anymore. They had to invent a new name because makeup artists didn't make heads spin around or vomit pea soup in a realistic way or do makeup so realistic that people didn't know they were looking at makeup. So the term special effects makeup came into being. And I don't know, genre films started being more commercial at some point. I don't know if it was all due to the extraordinarily successful Star Wars or when it started, or if it was all at once, just gradual. But in the 80s, there was a lot of money being spent on effects, and that was something new for the most part. And I love CGI effects. Some of the best effects I've ever seen are created via computer imagery, but if it isn't good, it tends to look synthetic. And just as there are poor practical effects, there are poor CGI effects. Practical effects have some unique quality that at least it looks real, whatever it is. It's a real thing in front of the camera. And sometimes, especially in a horror film, that's very important. I mean, you have to believe there's a monster there. If it looks even a little bit, it conveys that it's in another dimension somewhere. As some GI seems to look. It doesn't look like it's right there. Sometimes it doesn't, next to the actor. It impacts negatively on the intended effect to scare the audience, to be horrifying. They're certainly much better at it today than they were 10 years ago or 20, and that's just normal progress in the field. The pinnacle of practical effects may have been the 80s, even though there's top flight work being done to this day. It's not a lost art, but CGI is perceived today by producers generally to be the proper way to do special effects. And if you're doing practical, some producers, it's not uncommon, think, no, why would we do it that way? You don't have the same amount of control. You can't fix it in post if you're not using CGI. And it's just like there are fads in effects, just like there are fads in anything. And CGI is both a wonderful, innovative, progressive, revolutionary technology, and it's also a fad. It's not always a good thing, but when it's good, it's wonderful. So I have
a lot of viewers now are trained that if it's not CGI, it's not good effects, right? I've seen it. So many people kind of like, oh, those are pretty poor effects.
All psychological. If you know it's
CGI, yeah.
If you know it's a special effect, you're going to say, oh, that looks fake.
Well, I think the pendulum did swing back in recent years, though, because there are more practical effects happening in horror films now than, say, in the 90s and the early 2000s. Because what happened in 93 was Jurassic Park came out and did, it was one of the very first CGI movies, and the effects in that are amazing. And of course, they're complemented with Stan Winston's live action creatures. And also Terminator 2 had come out a couple of years before that. And, I can still remember the very first morph you see in that, which is something that you can do on your home computer today. I saw an early screening. Everyone applauded the morph because it was such a groundbreaking thing. And, producers all looked at that and said, oh, CGI is the way of the future. What they didn't have was the money or the artists who are as good at it. And if you look at any horror film in the 90s that has CG, almost all of it looks artificial.
Yeah.
You look at a movie like The Faculty or something, or even From Dusk Till Dawn, you look at the vampire meltdowns and they're so clearly digital. But I think what we've seen in the last decade is a generation of filmgoers or filmmakers who grew up watching the 80s practical movies. And so now they're making films with practical creatures and practical effects. And there are artists now, like there's a couple named Josh and Sierra Russell, who I see their names everywhere, have been doing amazing special makeup effects work. And especially now that we have horror films that are not so much creature films, but are a little more subtle. And yet when they do have special effects, they tend to be practical. So I think there has been a new generation that's rejecting digital effects and is saying, you can do this stuff with practical effects and make them look just as good. And then there are cases like even The Shape of Water had a practical creature on set, but they had CG enhancements like the gills and the eyes and things like that. So there can be a happy marriage of having a practical creature, and then you can enhance it digitally. And if you're good enough at it, it's in ways that I can't remember. I just saw a film, and I wish I could recall. My brain's a little fried, but I was asking I was asking the director, like, how is this effect done? And it had looked practical, and he said, oh, that was practical, but with digital enhancements. So
I mean, probably the best example of any of this these days, The Walking Dead, you know, where it's a lot of practical effects enhanced with digital effects.
Well, just the whole rise of zombie movies in general. Yeah. It's like that kind of brought back a whole wave of practical effects, because the best way to do a zombie is still with prosthetic makeup and not to do it digitally.
Right.
Well, as someone who's actually done some digital effects, let me say this about that. When I was doing that work on a computer, my goal was always to make it so that the viewer had no idea that they were looking at an effect that had been composited or created somehow on a computer. Because as far as I'm concerned, if it becomes obvious, you just rip the audience right out of the film, you defeat the entire purpose, and you failed at your job. And what's great about practical effects, whatever they are, even like the Lydecker brothers used to film their models out in outside, because it looked more realistic with the sun shining on it than trying to figure out how to light it in the studio. And so what I'm trying to say is, if you're going to make a film, you should use the technique that's going to convey the feeling that you want best. Yeah. Sometimes that's practical, and sometimes that's with using a computer, and sometimes it's a combination of both. And I think one of the best examples of using all those techniques is when Peter Jackson made his Lord of the Ring trilogy. He used every technique known to man in all of his films there. I mean, there's in-camera techniques, there's practical stuff, there's computer stuff, there's all sorts of stuff going on in those films. And as someone who's sort of familiar with the computer effects, as soon as I sat down to watch, and I watched most of those in the theater, it didn't take me long to just get sucked right into the story, and I forgot I was watching effects. That's what you're supposed to do when you're making a film. The audience is supposed to get sucked into the story. If they don't, you failed. That's all.
I just watched the entire Star Wars 9 films, and I was happy to realize that they're still, up to the most recent of the 9, and on TV, The Mandalorian, using a lot of practical effects. And I think part of that is because it's a good way to go, and they're smart people, and they know that, and they combine it with CGI. But in Star Wars case, it's a tradition also. They always did use a lot of practical, and they're trying to keep, you can see I realized watching online of the films that they try to keep things the same throughout the series of things you're familiar with, the looks, even the sound effects I hear in the last film that I heard in the first film. And, of course, bring the actors back when you can. But yeah, practical effects are alive and well. And smart directors know that it's the best way to go. Often, whether it's Guillermo del Toro or Steven Spielberg or whoever it is, there's a lot of love for practical effects, even in 2021, and either married to CGI or just independent of it. And it's never been better than it is with today's budgets and the skill set that's out there. It's unlike anything that existed in the 80s. The talent and skill that's in the industry. I mean, I don't know what these people would be doing if it wasn't for the film industry, but I never saw so much talent in effects work as I have in recent years. And it's wonderful to see all of it's alive and well.
Yeah, I mean,
There's not just practical, there's not just CGI, there's more effects work, period. It's just exploded in the last several decades. It's just been more and more and more.
and speaking of that too, I mean, you know, something to tap into what Cecilia mentioned earlier about it being a learning experience and also about this explosion of, you know, of talent. I mean, what's really interesting is as much of the controversy that surrounded the movie is that a good many of you, you know, especially in the effects, went on to, you know, really successful things in your careers, you know, and this was a launching point. And so, I mean, be interested to hear what you now reflecting, you know, looking back at the experience, you know, what you took away from working on Twisted Souls, Spookies, you know, and brought with you into your careers. I mean, you know, John, you worked on Beauty and the Beast on Broadway. Cecilia, you worked on, you know, From the Earth to the Moon, which won an Emmy, if I recall, right?
So, several Emmys, but mostly
yeah.
the big one was best series that year, or whatever the name, the title of it is. I mean, one of the episodes we worked on was nominated for a special effect Emmy. I think Merlin actually got it, but that's fine because the effects on Merlin were actually pretty spectacular. You know, and then you know, later on got visual effects Emmys for Dune and Children of Dune.
Well, what was your takeaway? I mean, if you look back now, you know, what do you think of the things, you know, for both of you really that, you know, you learned from that experience that really you brought with you along in your careers later on in life?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to answer that. I think one of the things I learned was that working on a set is really hard work, and that I didn't want to do it unless I was working with really talented people. And you know, I mean, you know, after having met somebody like Michael Lee, it was really a turnoff. I mean, I didn't blame Tom and Brendan and Frank for Michael Lee because I understood what they were trying to do. But I didn't want to put myself in a position where, you know, the thing was going to blow up in my face. You know, you work all this time and you go without sleep and all of this. And then, you know, some idiot who only cares about money goes like, eh, look you. So, you just get real, in my case, fussy about who you want to work with. But I think that, especially if you're a female person, you also have to deal with a certain level of sexism. And, you know, that also puts you in a position of really looking for people who are worthy to work with, because when they're not, it just becomes miserable. And I went out of my way to, you know, to really look for good people to work with, you know, which is why when I ended up working with the people who we did Earth to the Moon, et cetera, I mean, those guys were great. They treated me very respectfully. They were fantastic human beings.
I think if you're a professional, you want to work with professionals. I mean, that's, I think, what everybody strives to do, right?
Yes, certainly. But, you know, the thing is that the problem is a lot of young people go into this field and figure, oh, I'll take anything that comes my way. And they say yes to too many things. And I decided I was going to, when it was obvious, I was going to say no. No, thank you. Because it's a waste of time otherwise. And you got to be fussy, I think. I mean, it's good to say yes to certain jobs because you're going to get something out of it. Maybe you'll learn something, whatever. But you got to be careful about who you're saying yes to. That's my only point. Yeah, and so yeah, you have to have standards, and you just get a sense of I can't. Oh God, when I think of the job interviews that I went around in L.A., some of those people were just idiots. I don't know. There's just no nice way of putting it, but they it's like they only care about some kind of they want to be part of the in crowd, and so you go to their office and you see what they care about, which is not the art. It's only like being in a little club or a clique, and you right away sense this is not the place for me. I mean, in one place I could just tell this was just not going to work out. This is after I got after we worked on From the Earth to the Moon, and as I'm leaving the office, the one woman who was working there in the office, she says to me as we're leaving through the kitchen, she says, "This is a boys' club," and I heard that many times, but that just lets you know right there, this is not a place that you're going to be hired at or be treated well. So walk away. So yeah, that's one of the lessons I learned, certainly. So all you kids listening now.
John, what about you?
Spookies was a really good job for me, but I always say I've only had good jobs. I've had a series of wonderful jobs, and God knows some were hard jobs. Spookies, I learned a lot. It was early in my professional career, very early, and my previous film had been Deadly Spawn, which was shot very strangely over a 2-year period. There was no formality to the schedule. And basically I had, they're kind of dependent on me for monsters and effects. And if I said I need another week, I got the week. So I had no professional discipline. I didn't understand the world of filmmaking, where it's very costly to have to pay everybody for a day even, and all the attendant expenses, catering, whatever it is. I learned that you don't deliver something late, not ever. You're fucking so many people, it's just wrong. So even if it's not work that you want to turn in, you have to turn it in. And I was either late or the work wasn't what I considered finished on Spookies. And I learned not to do that, because it became real to me how many other people are affected than just me in terms of what the result is on the screen. If I want it to be good, I have to learn to get work done on Thursday if that's when they need it. And I became very good at that subsequently, meeting deadlines, never asking for more money, and being reliable. Being on time and reliable and all that stuff, because I just didn't want to go through again what I thought, problems I thought I was causing during Spookies with some stuff not being ready. I think I was more unhappy than they were. Nobody was really expressing that they weren't happy with what I was doing, but I was unhappy with what I was doing, because I wanted it to be this good, and to me it was only this good, because I imagined incorrectly we'd have more time to shoot it. And with practical effects, sometimes you shoot on like a 90-to-1 ratio. It just, 90% of it's going to be garbage, because you don't have the kind of control on practical work, the animation of it, the way it moves precisely, the way you do with CGI. So there's a certain amount of randomness to it, where you have to know that you're in advance, it's not all going to be good, and you have to allow time. I didn't know to tell them that. This is something now I would tell people about practical effects producers or directors. Like, a lot of it's going to be garbage. That's the nature of practical effects. I don't mean prosthetics so much, but mechanicals. Certain kinds of practical effects are somewhat unpredictable in terms of precisely how they move. And you have to shoot a lot of footage to get the good stuff. So I learned that, and
well, I know you'd mentioned too that, you know, the final stage of the Spider-Woman, you know, the final, I guess of the stop motion creature never got finished because of time and money. If you're looking back now too, is there also something, an effect that you wish you could have done, or something you could, you know, that just never was realized aside from that?
no, I wish we had more time to shoot it. It just the precision, just subtle things in the way that the thing moves on the screen, the exact camera placement, little tiny things can make so much difference. And you have to learn what those differences are by doing it. Sometimes with certain kinds of, we're doing certain kinds of effects with cable control. That's a little hard to nail on the first take. The control of it isn't highly, isn't there, or wasn't there with the crude methods I was using in the mid 80s. It would have been a better sequence with the final stage, the spider. It was intended to be a very short bit where you just see this giant spider, ugly thing, scuttle on, which I designed, but Vincent Guastini actually wanted to build it. I don't know if he just wanted to do it or he hoped that they would actually shoot it. I knew at that point they weren't going to shoot it, but he did finish it. I think you can see a picture of it somewhere on his website.
It's in the documentary too.
Is it in there?
Yeah, there's a picture of it. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, so it's out there. It would have been good. It was just meant to scuttle on and pause and scuttle off. That's all it was. But it would have been effective. I had built the set, a little spider cave in my studio.
So I think with merchandising now, because we talked about that in the last show, that, you know, there's a future for Spookies merchandising, and I said that'd be great. I want a Spider-Woman play set. You know, John, you got to get in there and work with Frank. You know, it's like and recreate the Ouija board. You know, all these accessories for the figures. You know, I think it'd be awesome. One thing I wanted to throw out there too, which is interesting, and again, it's a testament to Tom and Brendan's and Ken Kelch's you know, creative visions in the camera work. You know, if you ever go to the mansion or have the ability to go to the mansion actually, I was surprised when I first visited, is really not as big as it looks on camera, especially the rooms where the Spider-Woman, all that was shot. And it's just amazing, not only with the art direction, but with the creatures and the costume, everything that you guys did for the movie, how it makes it look so much larger than life. And that, again, it's just a testament to what you guys did with Twisted Souls until Eugenie Joseph goes. And that's why you can see it's like, you know, apples and oranges, you know, water and vinegar. You can see the contrast between what was originally done and what she changed for those scenes that were not done by Tom and Brendan.
I will remain hopeful they're going to find that missing footage.
Hope springs eternal.
Well, you never know. The pinhead reel turned up, so if it's out there, maybe there's a snowball's chance in hell. I mean, at this point, I know the director who did the Vipco documentary that's also in the Vinegar Syndrome disc was in touch with Michael Lee, and actually they asked him at one point. We actually we considered putting together a podcast of Michael Lee and Frank on there, and Frank was open to it. Michael Lee was open to it. It actually never happened, but long story short, one of the big questions was whatever happened to it. So whether he's completely full of crap or not, Michael Lee insists he's like, I have no idea what happened. I mean, if I had to guess, my best guess is Eugenie Joseph probably made sure that disappeared, or Michael Lee just didn't care enough about it to keep it. You know, if it meant a director's credit for her, I'm sure she didn't want that footage really getting out there, but who knows? You know, it's speculative at this point, so many years later. I mean,
a lot of labs have lost, like a lot of the New York labs have closed,
right,
and footage for lots of different films have gotten
yeah,
lost.
we talked about that on the last show, the fact that, you know, they had an offer to buy the footage, and if it wasn't bought in a certain period of time, it was going to be thrown out. So it might have simply been thrown out. Who knows?
And we've worked on a couple of projects as I have, where footage just was not available because a lab closed down, someone didn't pay their bill, and it was just disposed of.
Yeah.
So
Dan?
Yeah, well, Brendan had told me just recently, man, things pop up all the time, strangely enough. Brendan had told me he got a call one day, and maybe you're aware of this story, that they had the negative to The Killer Dead, this other film he made.
yeah.
He got contacted by the DGA or some strange situation. He goes, "Why are you calling me?" "Well, we have your negative here."
Mhm.
And I think he has it now.
Yeah,
but
the last time on the last podcast, he brought that up.
Yeah.
right,
And
and it's just
have
now he
happened.
has
Yeah.
it. So stranger things have happened. Just one more closing thought. If you look, you say the Testament of Spookies, and when I was up there, and I was very happy to go up to the Vinegar Syndrome release. I was Brendan and Robin's bodyguard and chauffeur, and for the day. And I remember somebody came up to Cecilia, and people were buying the Spookies. It was a big turnout. And not only do you see the people that are so excited about this film coming out, but I remember, Cecilia, they came up to you and they brought a copy of a VHS tape of some other film you worked on. And he was like a huge fan of this. And after he left, and everybody looked at each other like, "Oh my God," it's of all things, So this film has made an impact on people in the most bizarre sort of way.
You all made an impact on people, I think, with your careers and the work that you've done, and contributed to the genre.
Hey, I would have never met you guys if it had not been for, stumbling upon Brendan's set 30 years ago, and then, not knowing until 10 years later. And then all of a sudden, we're sitting here and I meet Michael, and it's so funny because I'm sitting there and I pick up a book that someone gave me and I go, "Oh my God, it's Ad Nauseam. Michael wrote this." That's the guy I was just eating fried chicken or eating the Puglasari burger at my restaurant. Puglasari burger.
Shout out to the warehouse.
Yes.
Always about the shameless marketing. That's all it is.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because one of the things that was blessed about the documentary project is I had known Brendan and Tom since I was a teenager in the 80s, and Glenn had connections with some of the other people. So, it wasn't a matter of having to track anyone down. These are all people we've known for a better part of our lives. And that's how it came together so quickly as it had to, and so well, I think. I don't think it would have happened if I had not met Brendan and Tom, when I was 14 or 15, and I actually wanted to be a PA on Twisted Souls, and I couldn't because I was too young to drive myself down to Rye to be on the set. But all those years later, it kind of comes full circle, and here we are.
That's it.
Yeah. And I mean, definitely was happy to be a part of the documentary. And I still say, of all the projects I've had a chance to work on, featurettes and documentaries, things like that, it still is mind blowing that everybody, Cecilia, John, Frank, all of you, the fact that how much stuff you still have from the original production and hung on to. I mean, the documentary absolutely could not have been done without, the assistance from all of you guys. I mean, and just the effort that you put into it, and it was amazing.
So note to filmmakers, hold on to everything, because 30 years later, someone may make a documentary about you and they will need those photos.
We could see it right off over your shoulder, right? That looks like the one of the original sketches, right, John? That's right to the side of you.
One of the things we never discussed.
Fighter lady.
We didn't have the chance.
With boobs.
Fighter lady.
Boobs. So now we have I didn't realize the proof was right there, but
right.
Yeah.
John, I don't think that actual part made it into the doc, but what was the reasoning why there was there a decision to cut the nudity out, or was that just the concept? Because, I mean, she has boobs clearly in that concept.
We must have discussed it. I wouldn't have, we must have discussed it, but I don't remember the conversation. I think Brendan thought probably it wouldn't be possible to show nipples, and how that became a flat chest, I don't know, but I don't remember the process, so I can't answer your question. I think I like the breasts, so I like them then, I like them now. I don't know why they aren't in the film, except that I think
who doesn't like them
in the
They add them with CGI now.
They can put it in. It's
That's
not
right.
CGI enhancements.
CGI them back in.
Spookies with CGI
For the next
CGI in its finest hour.
For the next re-release, if Vinegar Syndrome puts out a 4K one, Cecilia, we'll come to you. You can put in digital boobs.
Spooky.
Oh, yes.
Now
That's,
with breasts.
I'm longing to do that.
Now with additional.
Actually, I think it was Michael Lee who wanted to have the film be GP or some, not X-rated.
Right.
Again, because it had to do with how much money he
Money
was
would make, yeah.
anticipating getting. So, so that might have been the deciding factor on the boob issue.
But he seemed pretty, flippy back and forth anyway, because originally he said to you guys, well, I want something very Evil Dead-esque, but I don't want zombies. But then when the reshoots came, he put zombies in the movie. So, seemed like he didn't know what he wanted.
Well,
Of course
like
not.
A person who wanted. I mean, I've run into this myself as a scriptwriter. You have a producer who wants one thing one day and another thing the next, and they can't make up their mind because they have no vision. It's just whatever strikes them that morning.
I forgot he wanted a guy in a gorilla suit at one point.
Yeah. Well, he had a gorilla suit, so he saw that and said, "Hey, we'll have a gorilla in the movie now."
I just can't imagine what that movie would have been like if all of a sudden a gorilla popped out at one point in the movie.
Oh, you got a cat monster, a gorilla.
I think I might have liked the gorilla over the cat monster. I gotta say that.
Yeah, definitely. A gorilla would have made a little more sense than the cat monster.
Yeah, I agree.
Could be in the special edition.
Yep.
Now with
gorilla. Actually, the scariest creature in the whole film is the cigarette-smoking pedophile in the Michael Lee footage in the beginning, when the kid walks through the woods.
Oh yeah.
There's this guy sitting in the woods smoking a cigarette. It's like, what's up with this?
Just hanging
I'm
out
never clear on whether does that guy turn into the cat monster or is that a different? It's not even clear.
No, he was attacked by the
He
cat.
gets killed. You see his body.
Okay, yeah.
Because when I first saw it, I thought he was the cat monster, but he's not.
Yeah,
So,
it kind of seems like that at first, and then no, it's very unclear what any of that means.
Well, they wanted Jakey to. Well, that scenes were cut, but they wanted the actor to be the cat person, and he wouldn't come back and do it. So.
Crazy.
So much for that.
Crazy stuff. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming on today. This was fun once again, talking about a really cool movie. And so I want to thank Cecilia Doran and John Dods for joining us today. And it was great having you on here. And once again, thanks to Glen and Michael for for really kind of putting all this together. Really appreciate it.
Good to spend this time with you all.
There you go.
Yeah,
Exactly.
guys.
You're watching. If you haven't seen Spookies, go out and check it out. There's a great new Blu-ray that's got the wonderful award-winning documentary that we've referenced quite a bit today from Michael and Glen. So check that out. And of course, as always, want to thank Rich and Dan for being on the show with us as well. And let's give a shout out for the guy who couldn't make it today. Happy birthday to Mr. Chris Allo. The reason why he's not here is he is at
Happy birthday, Chris.
Happy birthday, Chris.
Happy birthday, buddy.
Happy birthday, Chris.
That's right. So visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. Of course, we're on Twitter. But more importantly, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. See you next Thursday night for another edition of the Monsters Den. Lots of other stuff happening here on the channel over the coming days. For everybody here, I am Pete Pardo. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.